Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard, so whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's feculent festivities, then there's something here for you. In this episode and the next few episodes, there's not so much of the commanding and whatnot. This is more of a thought experiment. Now, this is really off the back of the power level of the Votann, and whilst I'm sure they will get some form of nerf in the future, there are those people out there that don't think they're too strong, but on paper, I think they are. It is what it is. Maybe they won't get nerfed. But this little thought experiment is, how would we bring up the plague companies to the level of power that the Votann appear to have? Now, of course, Games Workshop aren't going to listen to me, so you haven't got to worry about these rules being ridiculously overpowered, because they're almost certainly never going to be a thing. However, I think it's a fun thought experiment to see what we would have if we were looking to be somewhere near the power level of the Votann. I'm not going to go with any ridiculous rules, because I would actually want these to work in a game, not just dominate. But let's have a look here at each of the plague companies, starting today with the first plague company, the Harbingers. Now, the Harbingers aren't a terrible pick, but they aren't a particularly common pick. And given that if you wanted to play the Terminus-est Army of Renown, you are shoehorned into the Harbingers, ultimately I think they could do with having a Warlord trait and a relic that actually warrant taking, rather than just being like, well, that's a waste of CP, I'll just do an interrupt in the game. So, first and foremost, the stratagem, the Wrathful Dead, giving full rerolls to Poxwalkers. On its own, not very strong, but when combined with Mutant Strain for the Mortal Wound Bomb, it can be very strong. So I think the 1 CP for that is fine. I think I would leave that as it is. That is one of the aspects of Harbingers that does get used and does get good value. However, the Warlord trait and relic, not so much. So Shamble Rot, while an enemy excluding vehicles is in contagion range of this unit, at the start of your opponent's movement phase, roll 1d6, subtracting 1 if the enemy has a character keyword. On a 4-up, they suffer 1 mortal wound. On a 6-up, they suffer d3. So, on average, you get 0 mortal wounds, if not 1 mortal wound. Occasionally you'll get a D3 and that'll be fine, but it's so out of phase that it's kind of awkward to use and not very memorable in terms of what it's going to be doing. So often I find myself just going, nah, even if I'm playing Harbingers, I just can't be bothered to do that. I'd rather have the CP for an interrupt or an Overwatch or something that could be more relevant in a given turn. So for me, Shamble Rot, the way I would change that is make it at the end of every phase, select the closest enemy, or select one enemy. I'm unsure on that, but just targeting one unit that's in contagion range. On a 4-up, no modification, just on a 4-up, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Now, I think if it was any, it is a bit strong against characters. So if we were going any, we make it the -1. So you need a 5-up, you get a mortal wound on whatever unit you wanted to pick, even if you want to pick a character, or a 4-up if they're not a character. Otherwise, if we just make it the closest enemy unit, then I think it's reasonable to just keep it a 4-up, and for that to deal a mortal wound. Now, I appreciate there are a lot of phases in the game. In a given turn, you've got command phase, movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase, morale phase. 7. Blessed. So, of course, you're unlikely to get the full 7 mortal wounds per turn because it's a 4-up or maybe even a 5-up if we do it that you could target a character with it, but they get a -1. You're not likely to get all those mortal wounds out every turn, and given there are NIDs out there that cast a spell and deal 3 mortal wounds extra for casting above a certain roll, like a supercharged Plaguecaster, I don't think that's that broken, because they didn't get hit that hard despite that massive mortal wound output. So for me, I think that embodies the cloud of the Destroyer Hive around the likes of Typhus, flying out and gnawing at the opponent, whichever is either closest, or selecting one, but we take that slight penalty on the chances that we would hurt a character. I think that would actually make Shamble Rot C play, and it'd be a lot more lawful in the way that it comes about. So you go, end of command phase, okay, fine, there's, it's turn 1, you're nowhere near us, not going to be an issue. Turn 2, 4 inches, so unless you're coming in to fight us, you're not going to get hit by it, really. And then turn 3, 6 inches, the lines are likely starting to engage now. So from turn 3 onwards, we might be dealing out 3, 4 mortal wounds with this warlord across each turn. But again, we're unlikely to see the full 7 per turn. So for me, I think that would be a nice improvement, and it would definitely make me more inclined to take the Harbingers detachment. And it would also mean you're not quite as reliant on Psykers to get a little bit more mortal wound output in the list. And then Infected Remains, so it's Harbinger's model only, once per battle at the end of the movement phase. You can select one objective marker within 3 inches of the bearer. While the bearer is on the battlefield, that objective marker is said to have the same Contagions of Nurgle ability that the bearer has. Now, if you were putting this on a character with the upgraded Shamble Rot that I've just referred to, I think it's fine. I think it immediately becomes fine. But if we look at it in a vacuum with the way that Shamble Rot currently works, because of course it's not actually changing, I think the way I would change Infected Remains is just to scrap what it does now. Let's not have it have the contagion effect. We could go one of two ways with it. Either it's a single use auto proc spread the sickness. Now, getting 4 victory points auto proc that easily is probably a dangerous direction for the game to go in. So I'm not advocating for that one, but I think that would be lawful. If we're talking about, spread the sickness is the poxwalkers getting all the guts out and being all disgusting on a point, leaving a fouled corpse full of Nurgle pathogens and whatnot is probably going to have the same effect on a given objective. So it stands to reason that that could be the effect that it has without breaking anybody's sense of immersion. But I think perhaps a more realistic approach would be that it creates a scenario where the opponent cannot control that objective until they cleanse it. So you've spent a CP to make, and you've moved up into position, you've got to the objective to deliver the relic, so it's not a freebie. You're in that position, you use the relic, so from now on, the opponent cannot control that objective until they complete an action. Now, I would make it quite straightforward. The action can be completed by any model, so we're not making it have to be infantry. Any model has to be in range of the objective. Standard rules of actions, just a typical action, you need to spend CP if you want to still be able to shoot and everything like that. And it completes at the end of your turn. So that puts the opponent in the position where they either need to fight you off the objective, but they don't claim it. Now, you wouldn't keep hold of the ownership of the objective unless you actually still have models that would contest it. So, you've got some OBSEC Plague Marines, you've got more bodies than they do, so yes, you own it. Otherwise, it would count as contested. So you don't keep it, it's not a freebie. But they would then have to decide between, do I kill the Plague Marines on the point, even though they're not going to own it, but it means I can kill them now and then claim it off them next turn? Or do I do the action now, remove my ability to not own it, and then try and fight them off the point afterwards? I think that adds a nice decision point to the game that isn't actually a thing, really. Of course, if your opponent's got models on there that are going to contest the point, you typically just fight them off it, and that's that. You don't need to decide between doing an action or fighting them off, because the majority of the actions that you would look to do on the point are only applicable when you actually control the point, like raising the banners and things. So for me, this just adds an action that has a very different direction and a very different thought process. And I think that would be really fun without actually hamstringing whoever you're coming up against, because at the end of the day, it's not a particularly limiting action. Any unit can do it, completes at the end of the turn, and from there, my 1 CP is done, but I made you waste the turn with a unit. And that could be worth the CP at least some of the time. So that's how I would glow up the Harbingers. I'd be very interested to hear if you have any other suggestions. Again, I'm not particularly interested at looking like what's the maximum power we could try and put out with them, but just how could we make them that bit better, that bit more feasible and feel reasonable if you were to run up against the likes of Votann with their many layered buffs and basically all positives. Because as it stands, Shamble Rotten Infected Remains don't feel like a positive when you're paying 1 CP for them. They kind of feel like you got shortchanged. Whereas none of the Votann stuff, in my opinion, really looks like you're losing out if you decide to spend in a particular way. Well, that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We will be back next time with the second Plague Company. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.